In 1853, a daguerreotype was taken of a young boy named Thomas Whitmore standing in the garden of the Blackwood Children's Home in rural Massachusetts. When digital restoration revealed what lurked in the shadows behind him, 3 historians would discover that some images capture more than memory, they preserve horrors that were never meant to see daylight. Before we begin this chilling journey into the darkest corners of American history, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. You're about to witness how modern technology can unearth secrets that have remained buried for over a century and a half. Dr. Eleanor Hartwell had spent 15 years cataloging photographic collections for the Massachusetts Historical Society. Her expertise in early American photography was unquestioned, her methods meticulous, her reputation built on the careful preservation of fragile historical artifacts that others might have discarded as too damaged to salvage. On a grey October morning in 2019, she received a call that would change everything she thought she knew about the craft of historical documentation. The caller was Margaret Chen, a genealogist from Springfield who had inherited a collection of daguerreotypes from her recently deceased great-aunt. Most were family portraits, she explained, typical mid-19th century compositions of stern-faced relatives posed in front of painted backdrops. But one image troubled her, a photograph of a small boy that appeared to have been deliberately damaged, with what looked like scratches obscuring portions of the background. "I've been researching my family tree," Margaret explained over the phone, her voice carrying an odd tension. "This boy doesn't appear in any of the family records I've found. The photo is signed on the back Thomas Whitmore, Blackwood Home, 1853, but I can't find any connection to my family." Dr. Hartwell accepted the commission without hesitation. Restoration of damaged daguerreotypes was precisely the kind of work that drove her passion for historical preservation. When the package arrived 3 days later, she immediately understood Margaret Chen's concern. The daguerreotype was indeed severely compromised, with what appeared to be intentional scoring across roughly 30% of the image surface. The boy in the foreground was clear enough. Thomas Whitmore appeared to be perhaps 7 years old, dressed in the simple dark clothing typical of institutional wards. His expression was solemn, his posture rigid in the manner required by the long exposure times of early photography. But behind him, the damaged areas created a mysterious landscape of scratches and deliberate destruction that seemed to mock any attempt at interpretation. Dr. Hartwell began her work with high-resolution digital scanning. The Massachusetts Historical Society had recently acquired state-of-the-art imaging equipment capable of penetrating layers of damage and corrosion that would have made restoration impossible just a decade earlier. As the scanner processed the daguerreotype at 2,400 dpi, she noticed something that made her pause. The scratches weren't random. Under magnification, the damage revealed a systematic pattern. Someone had taken considerable care to obliterate specific portions of the image while leaving others completely intact. The scoring was too precise, too deliberate to be accidental damage from mishandling or age. This was intentional destruction, carried out by someone who knew exactly what they wanted to hide. Using digital restoration software, Dr. Hartwell began the painstaking process of reconstructing the damaged areas. After 3 days of careful work, the first breakthrough came. In the upper left corner of the image, behind Thomas Whitmore's left shoulder, the restoration revealed the partial outline of another figure, someone who had been standing in the background when the photograph was taken. The figure appeared to be wearing dark clothing, possibly clerical garments, and seemed to be positioned deliberately outside the main composition. This discovery prompted Dr. Hartwell to research the Blackwood Children's Home itself. Founded in 1847 by the Reverend Josiah Blackwood, the institution had served as a refuge for orphaned and abandoned children throughout central Massachusetts. Contemporary newspaper accounts praised Reverend Blackwood's dedication to child welfare, describing the home as a model of Christian charity and educational innovation. But as Dr. Hartwell dug deeper into the historical record, she began to encounter inconsistencies that troubled her professional instincts. The Massachusetts State Archives contain surprisingly few official records about the Blackwood home's daily operations. Most institutional archives from this period were extensive, filled with admission records, financial ledgers, correspondence with state officials, and detailed reports on the welfare of individual children. The Blackwood files were different, sparse, almost deliberately minimal. Dr. Hartwell contacted Professor James Morrison, a colleague at Harvard who specialized in 19th century institutional history. When she described her findings, his response was immediate and unsettling. Eleanor, I've been researching Massachusetts child welfare institutions for 20 years. The Blackwood home appears in my notes as an anomaly. Everyone references it, but no one has primary source material. It's like the place existed in a documentary void. Professor Morrison agreed to collaborate on the investigation. Together, they began a systematic search for any surviving records that might shed light on the home's actual operations and the identity of the mysterious figure in Thomas Whitmore's photograph. Their first significant discovery came from an unexpected source. The Worcester County Probate Court had preserved a collection of estate records from the 1850s, including several cases involving children who had been wards of various local institutions. Among these files, they found a reference to Thomas Whitmore in a document dated September 1854, more than a year after the photograph had allegedly been taken. The probate record indicated that Thomas Whitmore had died intestate in August 1854, with his estate being administered by the Worcester County Court. But the disturbing detail was not the death itself. Child mortality in the 1850s was tragically common, but rather the notation that his body had been recovered from the Blackwood home premises under circumstances requiring investigation. This single line of bureaucratic language opened a new and troubling dimension to their research. Dr. Hartwell returned to the photograph with renewed focus, applying more aggressive restoration techniques to the remaining damaged areas. The second figure behind Thomas became clearer, definitely an adult, wearing what appeared to be clerical clothing, positioned in a way that suggested they were unaware of being included in the photograph's composition. But it was the restoration of the background areas that yielded the most disturbing discovery. Behind both figures, partially obscured by the systematic scratching, the enhanced image revealed what appeared to be additional children, multiple small figures arranged in a line, their faces turned away from the camera. The composition was wrong. Everything about the photograph violated the conventions of 19th century child portraiture. Institutional photographs from this period typically showed children in formal group arrangements, often with clear identification of caretakers and educational materials that demonstrated the institution's commitment to proper child development. This image showed something entirely different, a scene that appeared to have been captured without the subject's full awareness or consent. Professor Morrison's archival research began to yield increasingly disturbing results. Cross-referencing death records from Worcester County with the limited documentation from the Blackwood home, he discovered a pattern that defied statistical probability. Between 1850 and 1855, an unusually high number of children admitted to the home had died within their first year of residence. The death certificates, when they could be located, listed common causes: consumption, fever, accidents, but the sheer volume was unprecedented among comparable institutions. More troubling was the discovery that many of these children had been admitted to the home with no clear legal documentation, no family connections that could be verified, and no outside contact during their residence. Eleanor, Professor Morrison said during one of their evening research sessions, "I think we're looking at something systematic. These weren't isolated tragedies, this was a pattern of exploitation." Their investigation led them to the personal papers of Dr. Henry Whitfield, a physician who had served on the Worcester County Board of Health during the 1850s. Among his correspondence, they found a letter dated November 1854 that referenced an investigation into irregularities at the Blackwood establishment. The letter indicated that Dr. Whitfield had visited the home in response to reports of unusual mortality rates among the resident population. But the investigation had apparently been terminated abruptly. Dr. Whitfield's next letter, dated December 1854, stated simply that the matter of the Blackwood home has been resolved through direct consultation with appropriate church authorities, and no further intervention will be required. The administrative language couldn't disguise what appeared to be a cover-up. Dr. Hartwell's restoration work reached a breakthrough when she discovered a technique for revealing details in the most heavily damaged portions of the daguerreotype. By analyzing the chemical composition of the scratches themselves, she realized that the damage had been inflicted using a metal stylus, probably a pen nib or similar instrument that had left microscopic deposits of iron in the grooves. Using spectral analysis to filter out the iron contamination, she could reconstruct portions of the original image that had seemed completely destroyed. The results were horrifying. Behind Thomas Whitmore and the clerical figure, the photograph revealed a line of approximately 8 children, all appearing to be between the ages of 5 and 10, arranged in a formation that suggested they were being led somewhere. Their posture was wrong, not the formal stance of institutional photography, but the slumped, defeated posture of exhaustion or illness. Most disturbing was the expression on Thomas Whitmore's face, now visible in enhanced detail. The boy wasn't posing for a formal portrait. He was looking directly at the camera with an expression of unmistakable terror. The photograph hadn't been posed. It had been taken secretly, capturing a scene that the photographer never intended to document. Professor Morrison's research into Reverend Josiah Blackwood's background revealed a man whose public reputation bore no resemblance to the evidence emerging from their investigation. In the Rhode Island State Archives, they discovered records of a civil lawsuit filed against Blackwood in 1845, 2 years before he founded the Massachusetts home. The case involved allegations of improper conduct toward children in his care and misappropriation of charitable funds designated for child welfare. The lawsuit had been settled out of court, with records sealed by judicial order. The pattern was becoming clear. Reverend Blackwood had not been the benevolent child advocate portrayed in contemporary accounts. He had been a predator who used the institutional structure of orphan care to exploit vulnerable children while maintaining a facade of Christian charity. But the photograph suggested something even more disturbing than financial exploitation or physical abuse. The systematic arrangement of children in the background, the terror in Thomas Whitmore's expression, the deliberate effort to damage and hide the image, these details pointed towards something that challenged their understanding of 19th century institutional care. The final piece of evidence came from the private papers of Judge Samuel Abbott, who had served on the Worcester County Probate Court during the 1850s. His journal contained an entry dated March 1855 that referenced the Blackwood case directly. The matter of the Blackwood home has concluded with results that disturb my conscience. Evidence presented during closed proceedings indicated systematic mistreatment of children in Reverend Blackwood's care, including practices that violate both legal statutes and Christian morality. However, pressure from church authorities and concerns about public scandal have led to a resolution that prioritizes institutional reputation over justice for the victims. The journal entry confirmed their worst suspicions. The Blackwood home had been the site of systematic abuse, exploitation, and possibly worse crimes against vulnerable children. The institutional cover-up had been comprehensive, involving local legal authorities, church officials, and public health officers. But the photograph of Thomas Whitmore represented something that the cover-up had failed to eliminate: entirely visual evidence of the institution's true nature, captured by someone who had witness access to its daily operations. Dr. Hartwell's final analysis of the restored daguerreotype revealed one last, chilling detail. Using advanced imaging software to analyze the lighting patterns in the photograph, she determined that the image had been taken from inside a building, through a window or doorway, looking out toward where the children were arranged. The photographer had been concealed, capturing the scene without the knowledge of the subjects. The angle of shadows and the quality of light indicated that the photograph had been taken during the early morning hours, probably at dawn. This timing suggested that whatever was happening to the children was occurring before the normal activities of the institution would have begun, a private scene that was never intended to have witnesses. The restoration was complete. Thomas Whitmore's photograph now revealed the full horror of what had been captured in that daguerreotype from 1853, evidence of systematic abuse within an institution that had been trusted with the care of society's most blessed, calm, vulnerable children. The terrified expression on Thomas's face, the line of exhausted children behind him, the secretive circumstances of the photography itself, all of these elements combined to document a tragedy that had been successfully hidden for more than a century and a half. The investigation had revealed not just historical crimes, but a pattern of institutional failure that extended far beyond the Blackwood home. The structures that had enabled Reverend Blackwood's abuse, the deference to religious authority, the prioritization of institutional reputation over victim protection, the willingness of legal authorities to cover up crimes rather than confront them, represented systemic failures that had allowed such horrors to occur and remain hidden. Dr. Hartwell and Professor Morrison made the decision to donate the restored daguerreotype and their complete research files to the Massachusetts State Archives, with the stipulation that the materials be made available to researchers and historians while maintaining appropriate ethical guidelines for their use. The photograph of Thomas Whitmore would serve as evidence of historical injustice while contributing to a more complete understanding of the failures of 19th century child welfare systems. The restored photograph of Thomas Whitmore stands today as more than a historical curiosity or an example of photographic restoration technology. It serves as evidence that the systematic abuse of vulnerable children by trusted institutions is not a modern phenomenon, but a historical pattern that has been repeatedly hidden, covered up, and forgotten. The terror in Thomas Whitmore's eyes, captured by accident in a daguerreotype from 1853, reminds us that technological progress can sometimes illuminate horrors that previous generations chose to ignore. But it also raises the question of how many similar images remain hidden in archives and private collections, their secrets waiting for someone with the tools and courage to reveal the truth they contain. In the end, the restoration of Thomas Whitmore's photograph achieved something that 19th century authorities had worked to prevent. It gave voice to the voiceless, documented the undocumented, and preserved evidence of crimes that powerful people had believed would remain buried forever. Thomas Whitmore's restored photograph provides evidence that the truth has a way of surviving even the most systematic efforts to destroy it, and that technology can sometimes serve justice even across the span of centuries. The daguerreotype from 1853 continues to ask questions that extend far beyond its historical context about institutional abuse and the protection of vulnerable children. Like the video and subscribe for more stories history tried to bury. The past holds lessons that we ignore at our peril, and every restored photograph, every recovered document, every piece of evidence that survives the passage of time represents an opportunity to learn from the failures and crimes of previous generations. If you're still watching, tell me where you're from and what time it is. Together, we're uncovering truths that powerful people spent enormous effort trying to hide forever, and in doing so, we're honoring the memory of children like Thomas Whitmore, whose terror was captured in silver and light more than a century and a half ago, waiting for technology and justice to finally give it voice.